morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Kurt Weigel, in case you all didn't know that. President of the Downtown Development District, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here today to the DPE Leading Minds Breakfast. I want to thank, before I get any deeper, I want to recognize our chair, Judy Brasso. Judy, could you raise your hand over here to your left? Our chair, Judy Brasso. Thank Judy and our entire board for all the hard work that they do day in and day out for the Downtown Development District. Also here from our board is Todd Chambers. Todd, would you raise your hand? I think that's all we've got from the board today, right? But thank you to the two of you and to our entire Board of Commissioners for the outstanding work that they do for us. We're going to double your pay next year. I also want to thank our staff of the Downtown Development District, specifically Donna Doyle, our Director of Communications, and Katrina Neely, who are responsible for putting on this event. Join me in a round of applause for them and for our board. The DD created the Leading Minds Breakfast Series to bring acclaimed subject experts from a variety of industries to speak on topics of interest to our downtown stakeholders and to engage us in discussions vital to the future of downtown New Orleans. Today's speaker, Mr. Eric Larson, CEO of the Downtown Detroit Partnership, is going to lead us in a discussion on the real estate value and quality of life impacts of downtown parks. Downtown New Orleans continues to grow as the epicenter of innovation and creativity, I think anybody in the room would recognize, and flourishing with a constant influx of innovators and entrepreneurs, as well as investors and developers. Since Katrina, downtown has seen over $6 billion of new real estate investment. And the number of residents downtown has doubled over that same period of time. So we're really on a roll. DDD market research shows that the quality of place and lifestyle matters more than ever to our stakeholders and our potential stakeholders. One area of particular focus for the DDD is in creating a greener downtown and improving access to public spaces for our expanding group of downtown stakeholders. Earlier this year, the Urban Land Institute of Louisiana conducted a technical assistance panel for the DDD, made up of experts from a variety of fields, real estate, planning, parks, and so forth, to assess downtown green space needs, priorities, and prospects. After 2 days of wide-ranging discussions with 53 downtown stakeholders and brainstorming, the panel came up with a number of insightful recommendations. One of those recommendations was to start with a single park as a point of jumping off to begin the park and open space revitalization of downtown New Orleans. It's been proven that urban parks can be value generators. And I know that Eric's going to talk a lot more about that today. Great evidence of this, in fact, is at Campus Martius Park in Detroit. This popular redeveloped public space in the heart of downtown Detroit clearly has delivered a positive economic impact to Detroit Centric. Major office buildings have risen adjacent to the site, and residential developments and restaurants have opened nearby. I'll leave the rest of that to Eric. But let me say a little bit about Eric. Eric has 30 years of experience in real estate, has over 30 years of experience in real estate. To look at him, you will not believe it. But in addition to serving as CEO of the DDC, he is the founder, president, and CEO of Larson Realty Group. Throughout his career, Eric has developed, financed, owned, and managed over $3 billion of real estate, including General Motors' purchase and redevelopment of the Renaissance Center and Milliner Center, the development of One Detroit Center, and the A. Alfred Tallman Center for Design and Education in downtown Detroit. In addition to owning Larson Realty Group, Eric provides consulting services for Bedrock Real Estate Services, LLC, a Detroit-based full-service real estate firm specializing in the purchasing, leasing, development, and management of commercial space. And maybe we'll say a little more about that because that's a question many people have about Detroit, what's going on there. As head of the Detroit-based Olympia Development, Eric had a number of real estate development projects, including the planning, design, financing, and development activities for the Red Wings hockey arena, which is currently under construction. Eric serves as chairman of the Robert C. Larson Leadership Initiative and the Urban Land Institute Detroit Governance Committee. He's also chairman of the board of the Parade Company in Detroit. He is trustee for Beaumont Hospital, the Urban Industries Leadership Council, Locust, which, if you have a chance, you may say a little more about that, if you can, again, prop to. Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, on down the line, but something that will, I think, appeal to New Orleanians. He's also a Grand Jester of the Distinguished Clown Corps. And once again, I will leave you to describe that. With that, Eric Larson. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. I am actually a distinguished clown. Let me explain that first, because before I channel my inner Frank Sinatra in the Blue Room, I think I should explain my clowning. So the Detroit Parade Company is an 87-year-old institution in our city. And one of the major fundraisers is we get about 200 business and sort of philanthropic individuals in the city. And we all pay about $2,000 a year to dress up as a clown. We get to design our own clown outfits, but to dress up as a clown and walk down the Woodward Avenue on the Thanksgiving Day Parade, during the Thanksgiving Day Parade. So, Kurt, thanks for pointing out that I'm really just one big clown. I can't thank you enough for having me. It's great to be here in New Orleans. I have a very, very long and fond relationship with Kurt. He obviously left Michigan and came here and has been doing some amazing things, and we've been following that the entire time. The DDD and DDP are actually very similar in terms of what we try and do, and so to be able to have the kinds of relationships and partners in these various cities, especially cities that have experienced what we've experienced, both of our cities have experienced, is key to really making us stronger, better, and quite frankly more efficient. I also happen to have a long and equally as fond relationship with Lee Ferguson, who is also a big part of what's been happening here over the last few years, and he too has also brought a lot of not only his own personal knowledge, but also the knowledge that has been gained in what you've been going through to Detroit on a couple different actually ULI technical advisory panels that have been very, very instrumental in continuing to move us forward. Todd, I'd also like to thank you for a great night's sleep. Wonderful hotel, and it's really great to be here, and the renovations and just the overall service is terrific. So thank you for having me as your guest here today. So I'm going to launch in, and as Kurt said, I'm going to mostly focus on public space because that was really the intent. And I'm going to talk a little bit about not only Campus Martius, but some of the other public space in Detroit, but also some public spaces around the country, all of which we've heard a lot about, but try and link them together in terms of where New Orleans is headed, where the downtown is headed. So with that, I'm going to start with, and I'll do this very quickly because I think Kurt was asking me to explain my background a little bit more. I am a lot older, I guess, than I look. I don't know exactly why I don't look as old as I am, but I have been at this for just about 30 years. I started my career with Heinz out of Houston, and was part of the Heinz office in Chicago. Spent 15 years with Heinz doing stuff throughout the Midwest and Canada. That is what actually brought me to Detroit. The first project that was coming out of the ground in Detroit back in the mid-'80s was a project called One Detroit Center. It was a 1 million square foot office building designed by John Berge and Philip Johnson. It was actually the last building that the team of Philip Johnson and John Berge designed. And we successfully completed that, even in the face of the adversity and challenges that Detroit was going through. And then fell in love with the city. My wife actually was born and raised in Detroit, and her entire family is in Detroit, and so Detroit now is my home. I've moved around a little bit since building One Detroit Center. I spent some time with the partnership in New York, spent some time back in Chicago, but for the most part I've really been in Detroit working. And as Kurt said, I'm wearing 2 hats right now. We all wear multiple hats, but I'm still managing and moving my real estate practice forward. We're currently actually bidding on the old Tiger Stadium, so Tiger Stadium, Nathan's Field, historic, really sort of hollow ground in the center of downtown Detroit has been put out for bid. I'm one of 2 finalists to redevelop that project, hopefully with a decision coming in the next couple of weeks. And it would be a mixed use that would actually preserve, so talking about public space, it would actually preserve the original field. We would convert it to be used by the Police Athletic League, which is our local, well actually they're a national organization, but our local youth athletic organization. And looking at some innovative ways, and we'll talk about some innovation, but in that case, because it's more of a private development and there is for-profit market rate development around the edges of that field, we're looking at a conservation easement as one of the ways to not only deed restrict and protect the field, but also try and monetize the land that now will ultimately won't be developed upon. I also am the CEO of the DDP, the Downtown Detroit Partnership. That is a relatively new assignment for me. I've been actually on the board and was the past chair since '95. Not the past chair since '95, but on the board since '95. We've had a lot of transition in the city, and one of the transitions was a gentleman who actually had been here on a number of times. And Kurt, I don't know if many in the room would know Dave Blaskowitz, but Dave Blaskowitz also was doing double duty and was running Invest Detroit, which is our investment side of the public sort of support that we've been generating, as well as DDP. And the Invest Detroit was fortunate enough in the last year to get about $50 million from Goldman Sachs, and is now building a much more robust approach to subsidizing Detroit projects. And we needed to make some changes at DDP, and so I stepped in, and and I'm having a lot of fun, trying to learn from the best, like Kurt and others around the country, as to how we can best really be a steward. And so on that front, DDP really is the steward of downtown Detroit, very similar to DDD. We are an advocate for our stakeholders. We're an advocate for the business community. We have very similar lines of engagement, whether it's planning, policy. We also have just successfully completed business improvement legislation, so we're again a little bit behind the times, but nevertheless now moving into a much more stabilized source of funding. Unlike your budget, which I think is about $7 million roughly annually, our budget is projected. We have yet to collect all of our first set of taxes, but our budget we're anticipating to start off at about $4 million. And our downtown geography is almost identical to New Orleans. It's about the same size, and we have obviously some differences in terms of density, but we're really about the same size. So we're going to have to work very hard with that $4 million. We expect obviously the tax base to grow and that to increase, but that is a big piece of what is stabilizing our downtown and giving us the ability to move forward. So just to put Detroit in context, and again, you've heard a lot of this over the years, and so I'm not going to dwell on it a lot, but Detroit has had significant negative sort of headlines in the news, and most of what seems to be publicized, especially prior to about 6 months ago, was a lot of negativity. And so you saw all kinds of things about the emergency manager and bankruptcy, blight, population loss, a lot of the same kinds of things, I think, that quite frankly post-Katrina New Orleans was feeling, a little bit different in terms of the overall mechanics of how we were dealing with it, but very similar kind of situation. Our difference was, and this was the perception of Detroit, and continues quite frankly to be the perception of Detroit, and our challenge was we were a man-made sort of, if you put it in the context of New Orleans, we were a man-made hurricane, and we were a man-made hurricane over lots of years. I mean, we had 50 years of bad leadership, poor economic decisions, and ultimately brain and population The interesting thing is Detroit is 136 square miles, so it is a massive city in terms of land mass. You could put Boston, San Francisco, and New York, Manhattan, all inside of Detroit, and still have excess room. And we have, that would drive somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million in population. We have less than 700,000 in population. The city was originally built for 2 million, and the infrastructure that is, that really managed and supported that spans much more space and land than is really appropriate. So we're really fighting a strategy that says, where do we concentrate our resources? And this is all sort of coming back to the downtown and the public spaces. But the thing that we did for a number of years, and quite frankly, until we got to a place where we could no longer kick this can down the road, and it was sort of that man-made but natural disaster akin. We continued to have a shotgun approach. We continued to try and revive the patient through various, fairly unsophisticated and under-directed initiatives. And it wasn't until we really hit rock bottom and we ended up, having leadership at the state level and at the local level that said enough is enough. And they not only put us into a process of bankruptcy, which is clearing a significant amount of liability, which will ultimately, hopefully, wrap up in the next couple of weeks, which is in itself an amazing feat. I'm a big believer in synergy, and we happen to have a judge and a mediator that understood the importance for the community to get through this and get through this quickly and efficiently. And to think about the largest municipal bankruptcy getting done in roughly a year is pretty significant feat. But this is the reality, and I think this is the Detroit that we're really trying to communicate. And we still have lots of issues in the neighborhoods. We're still focused on how to deal with those issues in the neighborhoods. But the bottom line is we've changed the conversation, and I think those of you outside of our city and our region are starting to hear the change in terms of the conversation. The headlines are entirely different. We're starting to have a much more positive reaction, and a lot of that is really focused on this public space and the importance of public space. The importance of public space. Like New Orleans, we're very similar. We're both 300 plus years old. We actually just celebrated our 313th birthday. And we have a lot of the same challenges in terms of generating interest for this new economy. We have a corporate industry that is downsized. The auto industry really was our one-horse town. They no longer are the significant drivers. They're still a very important component of our economy, but they're no longer the single driver of our economy. We can no longer rely on them as the single driver of our economy, both philanthropically as well as economically. And so we really, like New Orleans, are looking at how do we reinvent ourselves, how do we make sure that we're taking advantage of an opportunity to reposition Detroit for the future as opposed to really what we've been doing, and that's relying on the past. And so there are a couple of key things that Detroit offers, and I think they're very similar to New Orleans. Detroit offers an opportunity for the millennial generation to really come and have a voice. There are very few places, major metropolitan areas, where someone fresh out of school or relatively new in the job market can actually come and instantaneously make an impact. And Detroit is one of those places. It happens to be a place that is very free and very creative. Our creative class, the arts and music community, is leading the way, as it often does, in a very pioneering way. We have over 1,900 arts and art-related organizations in the city of Detroit. I think that's a higher concentration than anywhere else in the country, and we've never really fully tapped it until this younger generation that has the flexibility of thought and the confidence of action that we really have been able to start to move in a direction that is more sustainable. So public space matters. It matters because they really do invoke a very strong emotional response. physical place or a physical space that isn't moved in one way or another. You're either moved in a very, very positive way, and it generates, very exciting and stirring emotions, or you're moved in a very negative way, depending on the way that the space is. So deliberate thought and caring to the public space is incredibly important to moving a city forward. It also tends to be the centerpiece. I mean, if you look at any major downtown, often what is focused, what is on the brochures, isn't so much the hard space. If I'm a developer and I'm putting up a new project, I'm going to have my project front and center. But the reality is, most of the marketing is really those public spaces. You think about whether it's Bryant Park or Millennium Park or Central Park. I mean, they are all sort of the lead. So it's very much a centerpiece. It's also very important, as Kurt has said, in terms of increasing value. It's increasing not only hard dollar value, but also social value. And then it just really becomes an opportunity to effectuate and increase additional development opportunities. We have found that, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Chris Lineberger, but Chris has been, and I'll touch on the locust thing real quick, because Chris has been heading up through Smart Growth America in Washington, D.C. He also is teaching at Georgetown University, but he's been heading up an organization called Locust. He recognized that the real estate industry needed a policy voice, really a DC-based advocacy voice for walkable, transit-oriented urban cores. And so Locust has been developed and is supported. Actually, Press Kavikoff is one of the steering committee members with me, as are a number of others around the country. And there is a real focus. Well, Chris has brought that focus, and we've teamed up with MSU, and we're now actually doing a actual study of the downtown. The first piece of that study, the Downtown Partnership, conducted a separate survey of the downtown, and interestingly enough, Laverdale is the survey company that did it. They did this similar survey for Cincinnati before it launched its bid. Interestingly enough, we have all three major sporting venues and all of the entertainment for the most part, with the exception of the Pistons, which are out in Auburn Hills, is in the center of downtown. That generates over 10 million visitors per year. Interestingly, they were second to the public spaces. So Campus Martius and the Riverfront had a higher degree of visitor frequency than the entertainment and sporting venues in the downtown. So we're learning some things that are, I think, very key to the way that these public spaces interact and the importance of it in the communities that they play. So Campus Martius, and I'll touch on Campus Martius briefly just because it is our centerpiece. And it was a gift from many of the city leaders for our 300th birthday. So about 13 years ago, the planning for Campus Martius went into place. It came at a time well before Detroit had hit rock bottom, well before Detroit had realized that it needed to focus on these kinds of things. And so again, as we were talking last night at dinner, it's kind of interesting because Detroit is a little bit the reverse of New Orleans. We didn't have the bid up and running. We didn't have the sort of strength of the downtown partnership, the DDD and the DDP, in a form where we had sort of a sustainable model around it. We didn't have the track record of being on the street and maintaining the public spaces and the team of folks that is not only investing in the capital programs, but also maintaining those capital investments. So we didn't have all of that, but we decided 13 years ago, and it started with Campus Martius and the Riverfront, to invest heavily in our public spaces in the downtown. We believed that if we could change the perception of the public space, we could change the perception of the development community. And so we've been investing. And so over the last 13 years, we've invested somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million between the Riverfront and Campus Martius in public space. It is the single biggest grant that the Carnegie Foundation has made in any of making across the country. They gave $50 million to the riverfront and $20 million to Campus Martius. So, clearly there's an understanding and a recognition of the importance of this stuff. Campus Martius started like this. This was literally 13 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And you can see there was nothing around it. We had a statue, a sculpture in the center of what was sort of a roundabout, and no development around it. Fast forward, and this is where Campus Martius is headed. A lot of this is being driven by the investment that is taking place. We've had over $500 million of investment just literally around the park. We have over 350 events in the park annually. It is the gathering space for downtown Detroit, where whenever there is a major announcement or issue, it's taking place at Campus Martius. It also is programmed in a way that it's seasonal. So we have this wonderful beach in the summer, and we have this great ice skating rink in the winter. So we've done things that are actually fairly efficient in terms of cost. To put a beach in, it is very, very inexpensive. There's not a whole lot of effort there. So we've tried to do that. And the end result is we've got a new CompuWare headquarters that was built directly adjacent to the park. That's a $350 million addition to the skyline. We've got One Kennedy Square, which was an $85 million addition. We've got the Weston Book Cadillac, which is one of the best additions in terms of our hospitality offerings in downtown, another $200 million investment. And I don't know, now to touch on Bedrock and Rock Ventures, I don't know that Bedrock and Dan Gilbert would have necessarily not come to Detroit if it weren't for Campus Martius, but I guarantee you Dan Gilbert would not have located in Detroit where he located if it weren't for Campus Martius. And the result of that focus by Dan Gilbert is over $500 million of investment. He has already acquired 60 properties. And I think one of the things that we're now challenged with is we have a downtown that is largely controlled by one entity. And so, with my DDP hat on, what keeps me up at night is trying to figure out how do we make sure that the public spaces and the opportunities for people to engage both in the development community as well as in the public space is balanced, because now we've got literally 14,000 employees that Dan Gilbert has brought down, 60 properties that basically are all contained within the downtown, all under one ownership, all sort of focused and operated in one manner. And that can be, in a place that really has benefited by having authenticity and by having the ability for people to participate. That's the single biggest challenge we have going forward in the downtown. And we're very well equipped to deal with it, but it is a fairly significant issue. We're also continuing the momentum. I think one of the interesting things is once people sort of recognize the benefit of the public space, but also the quality of management, and this is something that, quite frankly, this community has been doing and can continue to do. But the city then starts to really come on board, and we now are programming and activating, developing, programming, and activating 4 other parks in the downtown for the city as the downtown partnership through a conservancy. And these are parks that allow us some real diversity in terms of the way they're engaged. So Campus Martius, huge economic driver, very sort of traditionally programmed. But then you move over to Capitol Park. Capitol Park is this budding artist district, and the park that is in this district is significantly smaller. So Campus Martius is about 2.5 acres. Capitol Park is literally less than, it's about a half a city block. And it provides an intimacy in this community that now is surrounded by what is really an arts community. that is very unique. So we're creating these different districts and really trying to make sure that we're not over planning them, but at the same time providing some diversity and changes. So this is the direction that Capitol Park is headed. Capitol Park will be finished. There are 5 projects totaling $200 million that surround Capitol Park, all of which are coming online in the next 2.5 years, and the park renovations will follow. Grand Circus Park. Grand Circus Park is another, one of the 4 parks that we've now adopted. Grand Circus Park is at the terminus of the downtown leg of our main drag, which is Woodward Avenue. It happens to be the most sort of residential park. We have a number of residential developments that are taking place around Capitol Park, including a new residential and hotel mix use, including an A-loft. It happens to be the place that we were putting the dog park. So you start to think about, where is the dog park, where is the playscape, where are the things that ultimately relate to the resident versus the work and visitor population. And so we now are looking at these various parks and segments within these various parks that we can activate in that way. There is the David Whitney is a $100 million investment. As part of the bankruptcy, one of the large creditors has just received the underground parking structure that will receive another $50 million of investment. And so again, it's about $200 million of investment. This is the next phase of Grand Circus Park, which will be finished in 2015. And a lot of this you'll see is happening in Detroit in 2015, because that's at the end of 2015 when our first leg of our light rail comes online. Again, we're a little bit behind. Our first phase of light rail, M1, is fully privately funded. It's 100% privately funded. It has become really a guidepost for the federal government in terms of public-private partnerships. It's a roughly $60 million project. It'll go 7.5 miles, 2 ways, so it's not very long, but it's very important in terms of its linkage. Detroit's broken into 2 districts. The downtown Detroit's broken into 2 districts. The downtown sort of financial district, and then Midtown, which is much smaller, but it happens to be where our eds and meds are. And this linkage through M1 is going to be very, very significant. It's not just about the rail, but it really is about about the kind of linkage and support we can provide. And then just one other thing, and again, Kurt touched on my involvement with the Red Wings. This happens to not be the actual new Red Wing arena. I'd be glad to show you that too. But this is an area called Foxtown, which is directly in the center of our city. It actually sort of surrounds Grand Circus Park, which we were just looking at. It is where our Tigers and Lions play. They tend to be on the south side of the downtown. The new Red Wing Arena is literally just across the street on the north side. But this is the type of infill that is taking place and is happening around these public spaces. It's a 650,000 square foot arena. It's 250 acre development. So the Villages, over the last 11 years, have acquired 250 acres, some of which will be transferred into a public agency for the arena. The rest will be privately developed. It's over $1 billion investment. There will be 2,000 residential units, about 1 million square feet of office, and then obviously all of the entertainment and restaurant and sports-related activities. Real quick, just to touch on some parks that we all have heard and known, and probably many of us have experienced. But Bryant Park is another great example, very similar, and quite frankly, Bryant Park and Dan Biederman and his work were quite a bit of the leadership that we looked to as we started to develop not only the riverfront but also Campus Martius Park. It sat there for over 100 years, really fairly underutilized, not a whole lot of engagement And then, fast forward, it's completely transformed. The rents in and around, which is very similar to what we're seeing in Detroit, just, not to the same, obviously, overall magnitude. But the rents in and around Grand Circus Park have increased 114%. Now, you gotta sort of balance that, because New York has had obviously significant rental growth. But if you look at other areas around the city, so Times Square, 67%, Grand Central Terminal, 55%, Rockefeller Center, 41%. You think about those areas, those all are all areas that have some level of public space, but they aren't as programmed, they aren't as well designed. And there is a real economic benefit, as well as social benefit, but economic benefit to these public spaces. Another great example is the High Line. High Line is a little bit newer, and I like to think of it because it's very similar to what we've been trying to do in terms of, and I think you actually are doing with the Lafayette Park square opportunities, but it is very much about linking and creating public spaces that are getting from one destination to another. So it's what we're following in terms of the riverfront and the DeQuinder Cut. But the High Line also has seen significant economic benefit over the years, and again, is driving a social component to the downtown that is open to all, but yet supporting an economic revival that is very important. And that really takes me to the riverfront. The Detroit riverfront was formed again back about 10, 11 years ago. $200 million investment. We've seen over $1 billion of economic development and support from this investment. Very, very smart investment along the riverfront, reclaiming the riverfront, providing an opportunity for really the next wave of development and, quite frankly, residential development. So we have now McCormick Barron. McCormick Barron will be our first national developer, which is a little embarrassing and sad to say, but he's our first national developer. So very similar to what was done at Harmony Oaks. McCormick Barron is going to be the first on the riverfront to deliver a 300-unit project and take advantage of what has been created. The riverfront is about 5 miles. We've stretched all the way to the east to Grosse Pointe and are now starting the next phase to the west. So what we've tried to do is bridge to bridge. We're an international crossing with Canada. We have a bridge to the east that goes over to Belle Isle, which is one of the great public parks in downtown, which actually has just been taken over by the state for the next 10 years and turned into a state park. And then to the west, which is the Ambassador Bridge, which takes people to Canada. The other thing that we've really focused on is these abandoned railroads. In Detroit, the right to drive a car is like the right to bear arms in the Constitution. So we're getting over this idea of the automobile being the dominant transportation mode. And so things like M1, we have just formed a rapid bus authority for the region, a regional bus and transit authority, which we have 2 operating bus systems in the region. Makes no sense. So we're starting to really get smart about that. Yesterday, I received word that we successfully, through DDP, were awarded $2 million from our Department of Transportation, Michigan Department of Transportation, for a bike sharing program that we're going to roll out downtown. 350 bikes, phase 1, another 250 bikes the following year, addition. So other modes of transportation are very important. We have over 175 miles of bike lanes that we've already put in downtown, and we're increasing that on a regular basis. And we're getting better at how we're doing that. Because bike lane is, in our mind, not only another form of mobility, but it also is a public space. And so how do we make sure that we're being progressive in how we protect those bikes, the folks on the bikes, and making sure that they are not just going from one place to the other. And the DeQuinder Cut is a great example, where GM had bought up most of the rail lines, especially all the passenger rail lines back in the day, because they were trying to sell cars. Well, so we've got a lot of these abandoned rail lines. The Quinder Cut is one perfect example. And we have repurposed these old rail lines, which I understand you're looking at doing here as well. This is now an active public space that we are managing through a conservancy that has, again, created value because it's now bridging an area that is fairly industrial to an area that is residential from the river. So you don't need to necessarily be adjacent now. We can actually have development occurring throughout the city and providing those kinds of linkages. So at the end of the day, and I love this picture, we're actually playing around with the Hudson site. Dan Gilbert has retained shop architects, and this is one of their projects. But we're playing around with this inside-outside confluence of various activities on the old historic Hudson site in the center of downtown, where we would have education, innovation, public space all merging together, and this is sort of an example of that. But I think the most important thing is we think about the benefit of public space is it really does promote just this intelligent and more deliberate density to our urban centers. It creates a resiliency in the community that you can't find without the type of public space that we're talking about. There's an understanding of the market forces that's needed, though. So one of the other things that we're doing, and I haven't compared notes with Kurt yet, but I'm taking some of my private development, and especially the sports-related development, and bringing it to the public space. I'm working with a group called AMP. They're a subset of HKS Architects out of Dallas, who I had on the Wembley Arena. We're looking at public space and sponsorship of public space in a way that is very similar to the entertainment destinations that we all go to and participate. So if we know the demographic and psychographic makeup of the people that are using these public spaces, we can design sponsorships that are much more targeted. So we did 5,400 team members at Quicken Loans, which is part of the Dan Gilbert family of companies. Turns out that they're huge foodies. So we're targeting Williams-Sonoma for some of the Campus Martius Park activities because it's a captive audience. They also happen to be huge gamers. So we're working with Xbox and Sega to come up with gaming activities within the park and then have that sponsorship. And the other thing that we're doing is with those sponsorships, we're not taking 100% of that and putting it towards the park operations. We're taking 10 to 20% of that and allocating it to the foundation that ultimately runs the park, so that we're creating a sustainable level of funding as well. We're not just doing hand to mouth all the time, where everything we get in is going directly to that annual operation. Obviously, connecting capital and resource through this value proposition is key, and then integrating energy and resources. So, and I think the point there that I was trying to make is we often get sort of excited about the next best thing, and Detroit has been doing that for a long time. It's always been about the next shiny object. We've always been bouncing around the city trying to figure out how to put out fires, and we've now become very disciplined. We've become very disciplined because, quite frankly, we could no longer afford to do that. The foundation community that, quite frankly, kept the patient alive through a lot of funding and patience was no longer willing to do this scattergun approach. And so we needed to get really, really focused and really deliberate. And so the more focus, the more energy, the more sort of direct knowledge you can put into specific spaces before you move on to the next, the more successful and the more important it is. So, I could go on. I don't know if you want me to go on. I feel like, it's always, risky to talk at people as opposed to talk with people. So I would love to spend some time talking about whatever is on the mind of anybody in the room. Take sort of a page out of ULI and spend some time just talking. So I'm happy to field some questions. I'm happy to answer anything about the activity that's going on in Detroit and some of the lessons we've learned. But I think I've talked long enough.
A couple of years ago, I was approached to participate in a bridge project, $2 billion bridge project going from Detroit to Toronto. And they showed it was part of the strategic sister city initiative to help advance both cities. Can you speak to
So Detroit has, in downtown, has two main crossings. We have a tunnel and we have an Ambassador Bridge. Both, interestingly, are privately owned. They're the only privately owned international crossings in North America. The state, the amount of commerce that goes between Canada and the U.S., but Detroit in particular, is very significant and is only increasing. And so our capacity, obviously, is somewhat limited by those two crossings. And so it's been identified that we need to expand the capacity. There also is an underlying current, which isn't, as talked about, but there are some politics around it, and the fact that the bridge, the owner of the bridge, that has been the owner of the bridge for a very, I think 70-some years, is not as sort of cooperative. And so the state, in a partnership, and it's been state-led, in a partnership with Canada, with the province of Ontario, have come up with a plan to build a new span, so a new international trade crossing. It is, I think, if you listen to Manny Maroon, who owns the current bridge, the Ambassador Bridge, he believes it's a direct attack and affront on private business and will ultimately impact his ability and revenue to support his bridge crossing. The research shows, and I don't know exactly how I can be helpful in terms of what you've been approached and your thoughts, but the research shows that there is significant demand well beyond anything that those two existing crossings can support. And so we've cut a deal with Canada, where Canada is actually funding the construction of the bridge. There is a sharing of the revenue to pay back the funding of the sharing of the bridge. Michigan will build the bridge. Michigan suppliers and materials and workforce will build the bridge, and Canada is providing the loan. It is the current status of that is the land acquisition and environmental impact are being conducted right now. There are a couple holdouts, as there always are, that are being worked on in terms of land holdings that are necessary in order to facilitate this, but it is moving forward, and it is a very important piece to improve the overall competitiveness of what is a very important relationship with Canada, and quite frankly, a huge economic driver for our region. We're looking at, so some of the things that Detroit is looking at, not necessarily just downtown. We talked about the millenniums, we talked about the fact that there is a innovation push just like there is here. We just had the music school from London open in downtown Detroit, because it's not just about technology, it's also about music. The music industry is changing. We just had an anniversary for Berry Gordy in Motown last week, and a lot of the conversation was how do we bring music back to the Motown, so it's not just about the automobile, and use sort of the changing industry where you see Bono releases his album on free to all of the Apple iTunes subscribers. It's no longer about big companies controlling the content and the performance. It's more about the distribution and the accessibility. So the open sourcing. So we're focused a lot on that, but one of the other areas that we're focused on is logistics. We think we're in a very good spot in terms of the country. We have two airports that are very sufficient in terms of handling increased logistics capacity. So we're building a logistics focus as well, and the bridge is a piece of that. Yes?
I noticed in your conversation not mention the role of the mayor or the councilman or the governor. And I was just curious, as you've been developing this over the last 10 years, repositioning Detroit, all the things you're doing in public spaces, how important is and has been the relationship between the mayor and the council's leadership in what you've been doing?
That's a great question. Can you hear me without the mic, or can you hear me? Okay, all right. I feel like I'm chained to this podium. The great question. I think everybody heard the question, but it's how important and how active governor, mayor, and local city council. So past Detroit, 0. Completely unreliable, completely dearth of any real leadership, fairly corrupt, maybe not the same type of corruption, but fairly corrupt, as I said, completely unreliable. So when we started this 13 years ago in terms of public space, it was entirely led by the private and philanthropic sectors. There was little to no public involvement, only where we had to get some sort of approval or something in order to activate the space. Now fast forward, and again, this is why